Most retirement advice you find online is either too vague or it assumes you have something like $10 million in the bank and a dozen rental properties, so it's not really helpful for most people. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through the exact financial plan I'd want if I were 55 years old and had $1 million saved for retirement. We'll cover real strategies that you can utilize in your own retirement plan, including asset allocation, withdrawal sequencing, and tax strategy. And make sure you stay through to the end to catch the case study about what an optimized $1 million portfolio looks like, how, if structured correctly, it can grow during your retirement, and what efficient withdrawals will look like to minimize your lifetime tax burden. And before we dive in, my name is Ryan Knoll. I'm a certified financial planner and founder of NavWealth Partners, where we help clients across the country build smart, efficient retirement plans. Let's jump into the video. So let's start by defining our scenario. Imagine that you're 55 years old, you're married, you're planning to retire in another decade at age 65. You've saved up $1 million. You won't have a pension, but you'll have Social Security to fall back on. Maybe you'll work part-time for a few years during the first part of your retirement, but the goal is to have work to be optional by age 65. And then you'll be able to hit the beach or backpack across Europe like you've been planning for all these years. Now, $1 million is a fantastic milestone to try to get to, but it's not some sort of silver bullet or magic number. What you do with your money matters just as much, if not more, than how much you have. So here's exactly how I would walk you through your plan and how I would structure it. The first thing you're going to want to understand is your spending needs. And let's say that you want to spend $6,000 a month in retirement, or about $72,000 a year after taxes. That's a middle class to upper middle class lifestyle. And that's depending on where you live and where you're planning on retiring in the future. Now, Social Security will help. And if you were to delay till age 70, you might receive something like $3,500 a month or $42,000 a year, adjusted for inflation, and that's a pre-tax number. That means you're going to need to generate another $30,000 to $40,000 of pre-tax money from your portfolio to close the gap. Now, let's throw taxes aside for a second. That would be a 3% withdrawal on a $1 million portfolio, and that's very doable within a well-designed plan. But how you get to that point, and specifically what you do between the ages of 55 and 70, is going to matter enormously as to whether you're going to hit that number or not. One strategy that you could take at this point would be to split the portfolio by time horizon. Rather than look at your $1 million as one big account, you can utilize a strategy that can actually split it up into buckets and segment the money for different purposes. The first bucket might be something for your more short-term needs, like something within the next 2 to 3 years. This is typically cash or short-term bonds, safe, stable, and liquid investments that aren't going to lose principal should the market go belly up. You might want to allocate something like 10% of your portfolio there to cover early retirement income and needs and emergencies, but this is what's going to keep you afloat while the rest of your portfolio does more of the heavy lifting. Now, the second bucket's going to be more geared towards your midterm needs. So something that would be after that short-term bucket, but not quite a decade plus out, where you want to start building a plan for inflation protection and growing the assets at a higher clip. So the midterm bucket's going to hold more moderate risk investments. You might be something like 50% in stock and 50% in bonds. And you're going to allocate 30 to 40% of your overall portfolio there. And this will be money that will help you to get through the first part of your retirement. Again, we don't want to take too much risk here because it's money that you're going to be counting on in the near term, not like the immediate future, but somewhere down the line that's not a decade plus out. Now, the third bucket's where you're going to have the remainder of your money, and it's typically the largest bucket. You're going to want 50 to 60% of your portfolio here, and that stays invested for long-term growth. Maybe something like 70, 80, 90% in stocks, depending on your risk tolerance, with the remainder going into bonds and cash. This is your inflation protection and your legacy fund. It gives the plan longevity. So while the other assets that you're planning on dipping into over the next 2, 3 to 5 years are protected and less aggressive, this is what's going to actually give you growth in order to meet your spending needs throughout your entire retirement. At this point, you want to start thinking about smart withdrawal sequencing. And this is one of the biggest mistakes I see retirees make, is that they pull from the wrong account at the wrong time. Let's say you've got $500,000 in a traditional IRA, $300,000 in a Roth, and $200,000 in a taxable brokerage account. Here's how I want to sequence the withdrawals in order to maximize my money. First, we want to utilize the taxable accounts. This lets the tax advantage accounts, or your IRAs in this instance, keep compounding. Plus, you get favorable long-term capital gains tax treatment on the taxable brokerage account. And if you've been practicing tax loss harvesting and direct indexing appropriately, you may even be able to tap these funds completely tax-free during the early portion of your retirement. The next step would be to utilize your traditional IRA funds once the required minimum distributions begin or earlier as is part of a broader strategy of Roth conversions. So between the ages of 65 and 70, I might want to start small Roth conversions to reduce future required minimum distributions that might otherwise push me up into higher tax brackets. The more money you have in this bucket as a portion of your $1 million, the more sense it would make to start converting that money to Roth dollars. You want to maximize for a specific tax bracket in order to keep your lifetime taxes lower than what they would be had you simply just let it ride and not done these conversions and been subject to future RMDs at a higher amount. This is a really important strategy that I've seen add hundreds of thousands of dollars to somebody's plan over 30 or 40-year retirement. And then finally, the third bucket that you want to tap into are your Roth IRA funds. These are tax-free, so you want to let them grow as long as possible, especially if you don't need them right away. This is also typically the most aggressive portion of your portfolio, so it has the longest time horizon and the best ability to grow in order to meet future obligations. So you want this tax-free bucket to get as big as possible over a long period of time because this is going to be the last bucket that you're touching, and it'll work with you through the rest of your life or provide a legacy for your kids and grandkids. This sequencing can save you tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of dollars in tax and add an additional 0.3 to 0.75% of return a year just based off of maximizing asset location. It'll also help you to avoid paying higher Medicare premiums in retirement, which is another surprise charge a lot of retirees get. So I want to dig in at this point a little bit more into Roth conversions, especially in that pre-Social Security window. So one of the biggest opportunities in this plan is the window between retirement and age 70 to 75, depending on when you were born and when you have to start taking your required minimum distributions. So let's say that you retire at 65. You're not taking Social Security yet, and you're using your taxable assets for income. That likely puts you in a relatively low tax bracket. So during these years, I might want to start considering converting my traditional money to my Roth IRA. Maybe $30,000 to $50,000 a year, something that's not going to move a whole huge portion of the account in 1 year so you pay a ton in tax liability in that year, but systematically over time to keep you in those lower tax brackets. And you want to do this because it'll reduce the size of your required minimum distributions in the future. So typically somebody who has $1 million in traditional IRA or 401k assets, when they're forced to start taking your distributions, will have to take out somewhere between $35,000 and $45,000 in year one. Now, by the time they reach their mid-80s, which is a very realistic possibility for a lot of people retiring this type of wealth, their required minimum distributions are going to be exponentially bigger because that account's still grown over time and they're older. So what was a $40,000 withdrawal at age 75 might be closer to $120,000 by age 85. The other thing this does is it lowers your future taxable income and it builds up your Roth bucket, which allows you to be a little bit more aggressive based off of utilizing asset location to your advantage. This will give you more flexibility down the road, especially if taxes rise. Even if taxes don't rise, you still have that flexibility, which is probably the most important thing that you can have within a retirement plan. And now I keep mentioning asset location, so I just want to spend a moment talking a little bit more about what that means. And if you want an in-depth look at asset location, go back and watch the last video I posted earlier this week, and we'll dive into asset location and all the nuts and bolts if you want to get real down into the nitty-gritty. But on a high-level overview, here's how it works. You want to utilize the investments based off of how your accounts are set up. So you don't just want to evenly spread across all of your different types of accounts the same exact portfolio. You want to be a little bit more aggressive in your Roths, you want to be a little bit more tax efficient in your brokerage accounts, and you want a good mix of investments inside of your traditional 401ks and IRAs. So you would look to put things like bonds and real estate investment trusts inside of the traditional IRA. These are very tax inefficient assets, so I would want those sheltered. Your tax efficient stocks, those go in your taxable brokerage account. This lets me benefit from capital gains treatment and utilizing tax loss harvesting and direct indexing. In my highest growth assets, well, I want those in my Roth IRA and my Roth 401k. Because I have so much more time in this account, I can afford to take more risks. And this is the last bucket of money that I'm going to dip into. A simple shift like this can add 0.3 to 0.7% to my after-tax return annually without taking on any additional risk. So if we were just to compound out the lower end of that bound, the 0.3% return and annually over a 30-year period on $1 million retirement, that's an extra $94,000 in funds without additional risk. So if we go back and tie that into the previous part of the video where we know we need $72,000 a year after tax in order to maintain our living expenses, we've just added on another year's worth of income and then some just by simply maximizing for asset location. Now we're at a point that we want to start thinking about some of the cost sides of retiring earlier at age 65. So this is when we want to start coming up with a plan for healthcare costs. So we know at 65 you're going to be eligible for Medicare, but that doesn't make healthcare free. You want to budget somewhere between $5,000 to $6,000 per person per year for Medicare premiums, supplements, and out-of-pocket costs. Possibly more if you expect higher usage or want a more comprehensive coverage package. And I'd want to watch my income at this point as well, because higher income can trigger IRMA surcharges that increases the cost of Medicare's Part B and D. So again, at this point, Roth conversions before 70 can help manage all of those risks. You'd also want to consider how you want to fund a long-term care event. If you're married, it's statistically likely that either you or your spouse will face a long-term care event, and oftentimes these cost about $250,000 pre-tax. So coming up with a plan to properly fund this is essential for protecting a $1 million portfolio, because I've literally seen 30 to 40% of a portfolio wiped out because one spouse has incurred a long-term care event. So now it comes back to revisiting the plan on an annual basis. Specifically, you want to make sure you have a good handle on what the tax picture is going to look like over time. This isn't just a set it and forget it strategy. Every year you want to look at specific items. Some of those items include whether you should continue Roth conversions, if you can harvest losses in the taxable portion of your account, should you do it, or should you offset gains or utilize those losses to offset income? So whether your withdrawal strategy still aligns with your income needs and your tax bracket is also very important, because you want to make sure that you're meeting your basic needs while also not tipping yourself into a higher tax bracket. And finally, you want to understand your required minimum distribution picture and how it will affect taxes down the road. If you're not aggressively converting Roth, what will those required minimum distributions grow to? And what will the tax liability be in those years in which you're forced to start taking that money out when the government dictates it? So this is an ongoing process, and it's not a one-time decision. And this is really where a great planner comes into play. They will tell you over the long term what makes the most sense, but that's on an annual basis. They're going to do all of these different calculations in real time for you as the tax code changes and as your situation changes, in order to make sure you're still maximizing your dollars for the current year and over the next 3 decades. So let's zoom out. If you were 55 years old and had $1 million saved for retirement and you knew you were going to retire within the next decade, here's some things you should be thinking about doing. First is to invest based off of your time horizon, not just your risk tolerance. You'd want to plan your withdrawal strategy in advance, coordinating across account types and tax brackets. You'd want to utilize Roth conversions and tax-smart asset location to reduce your lifetime tax bill and provide you with excess return. And finally, you'd want to build flexibility into the plan. Life isn't linear, retirement's not going to be either. And this isn't just theoretical. This is what we help clients with every day at NavWealth Partners. We build real retirement plans for real people, not just spreadsheets. So let's look at a brief case study of what it looks like for the average couple who has $1 million saved at age 55. This couple is going to work till age 65. They're going to have a spending need of $72,000 a year. They're not going to touch their Social Security until they're 70 years old, and they're going to have no other sources of income. We're going to walk through everything this couple should be considering to maximize not just the next 7 working years, but the next 35 to 40 years of their life. Let's jump into the case study to show you what the numbers look like. Okay, so here we have John and Jill Smith. The idea here is that these are going to be our $1 million client, and they're both going to be 55 years old. So what I'm going to want to do here is I'm going to walk you through what their plan will look like over not just the next 10 years, but what their retirement picture will look like as well, as we implement some of the things that we talked about earlier in the video. So the first thing I want to do is I just want to walk you through the facts of the situation. So we'll see that John and Jill are both 55 years old. They both plan on retiring at age 65 within the next 10 years here, and both have an average life expectancy of about 90 years old. So the important thing here is to know, how is their wealth set up? Well, it's set up just how we described in the video. They have a $200,000 brokerage account. Jill has an IRA worth $500,000, and John has a Roth IRA that's worth $300,000. They also have a primary residence that's included in here. It's not liquid, so it's not technically part of the $1 million, but it is part of their net worth. So that's listed here as well. It's just shy of $500,000. So we'll also see here that we expect the Smiths to make $125,000 a year between the two of them over the next 10 years. Jill makes $75,000 a year and John makes $50,000. They also have Social Security that they expect to start at age 70. And for each of them, just for simplicity's sake, it's going to be $21,000 or the $42,000 that we mentioned earlier in the video. And we also want to look at their current living expenses are $72,000 a year. We also expect this to be the case in retirement. We're also modeling in federal taxes, state taxes, and local taxes as well here. So that way we have the full retirement picture. One last thing that we want to look at is what happens, or what are they doing in order to maximize their retirement accounts? Well, Jill's putting in the $8,000 a year that she could put into her traditional IRA, and John's putting the same amount into his Roth IRA. We don't have to worry about contribution limits or anything like that, because they are both well within the contribution limits for each type of account. That's probably not a maximized picture, but this is just what they're doing. So this is just to illustrate the point of them making some sort of retirement contributions. So the next thing you want to do is we're going to click into plans here, just to give you an idea of where are we based on making no changes. So these are our base facts. So you'll see here by age 90, we'll have an estimated net worth of about $3 million, a little over $3 million, should they make no changes. So that assumes they're still spending the $72,000 a year. Their income comes as we just described in the last couple of minutes here. We would expect their portfolio to keep growing over time. Now, you might sit here and say, hey, $1 million at 55 is worth $3 million at age 90 when we either pass away or we're still living a few more years here. That doesn't sound so bad, but is there a better way? Is there a way to optimize that? So the first thing we want to do is we want to go back here and we want to click into plans to actually build out a scenario for the Smiths here. So the first thing that I want to show you is that John and Jill, they have a couple of things going on here. We're going to do a Roth conversion for Jill starting at age 65 when she's retired, and we're going to fill up the 22% tax bracket. The other thing that we're going to do is we're going to optimize for asset location, or are we making sure that we're more aggressive in our Roths, more tax efficient in our brokerage accounts, and have a good holistic mix of everything that's in our traditional accounts? So when we go in and we actually look at the plans here, we'll look at the decision center under their plan when everything's optimized. Obviously, you see the bars are growing in value there. So I just want to level set this and show you, hey, we're at the same place we were if we made no changes. So let's say that we're just going to re-optimize John's Roth IRA specifically for asset location. So when we do that, we would expect that to add about $620,000 of value to the portfolio just by simply saying to John, hey, you're not as aggressive here as you should be. This needs to be the most aggressive portion of your portfolio. We're not changing the overall mix of your portfolio. You're still a 70-30, 80-20 investor. We're just being a little bit more aggressive in the Roth bucket. Now, the other thing that we're doing here is that we're setting up a Roth conversion for Jill at retirement. So this will set up the account so there should be no changes here in expected value. But then what we want to do is we want to fill up the 22% tax bracket for the Smiths every year. And by filling up the 22% tax bracket for the Smiths, what you're seeing here is we're seeing, here's retirement, here's year one. We're seeing net worth increase because this is going to be the taxes paid in order to do the conversion of Jill's traditional IRA. We're still down a little bit 5-6 years out, but then something magical happens around age 72. We've actually recouped more value from the Roth conversions than we would have paid in taxes to begin with. And then we'll see that this starts to grow at a bit bigger rate at age 75. Because the other side of it here is as we get older, requirement distributions would have been bigger should she kept that money in her traditional account. So you'll see here, if we fill up the 22% tax bracket, we actually expect that to add about $1.6 million in value compared to what it would have been had we just followed the regular distribution plan. And when we couple that with John's Roth IRA optimization for asset location, we're actually seeing about $2.1 million worth of value added right here. So we'll see, if before, had we made no changes, we'd have had a little bit less than $3.1 million. Now, after making these changes, we have a little bit less than $5.2 million left over at age 90. And this is the value of decision making. So let's take a more granular look at the cash flow of each scenario. So you'll see here under the base facts, same ending value, a little bit over $3 million, a little less than $3.1 million. Here's the income flows. They make the $125,000 a year. We're indexed for inflation up until they retire at age 65. Then we're pulling money from the account, roughly $96,000 a year to cover not just the distributions that they need, but their taxes as well. And then that money's going to continue to grow, those expenses are going to continue to grow year over year. And then ultimately what ends up happening is at age 70, they each claim Social Security. So they get $42,000 a year from Social Security. So then their total expenses need to account for their Social Security picture plus what they're pulling from their portfolio. Overall, the portfolio is still growing at a relatively solid clip up until the age 90 year, even though we're taking Social Security and there's plan distributions in the way of required minimum distributions for Jill at this point in time as well. That's how we're getting to that bottom line number. Now, when we compare that to the plan that we have for them, here's how that changes a little bit. So we'll see here, income still outpacing expenses while working. That drops off just like it did here. And we're seeing baseline income at age 70 when they start taking Social Security. But the big difference here are going to be what's happening immediately at retirement. In fact, you're going to see bigger expenses in these 3 years because that's when we're starting to do those Roth conversions. So if I actually were to look in here, I bet you the overall burden of expenses going up is specifically due to taxes, which makes sense because we're doing those conversions in that year and we're converting a relatively large amount of money up into the 22% tax bracket. So what we're doing is we're accelerating taxes paid through the first 3 years of retirement to get Jill's IRA completely shifted over to Roth in order to pay basically next to nothing in taxes over the remainder of their lifetime. And that's what moving this money from the traditional accounts and liquidating the taxable brokerage account first will do. Because essentially by the time they're age 81, all they have is left over is Roth IRAs, which are much bigger than what they were under the previous example, which are carving off income for them tax-free every year. So basically they have $138,000 worth of expenses at age 81. They're completely mitigated by taking distributions from the Roth IRA that they're paying no taxes on. So we've essentially mitigated taxes completely from this point on, and I would argue after the conversion's done. So that's the reason why we want to do conversions. That's the reason why we want to maximize for asset location. So even though the Smiths have done a really good job saving, and they're going to be okay regardless of whether they engage with us or not, we can still add an extra $2 million worth of value to their portfolio by making 2 simple changes that they probably haven't thought a lot of, because frankly, they haven't had to. They've done a good job. This is the value of working with a planner. This is the value of sequencing withdrawals, of maximizing for asset location and doing Roth conversions at the right time. Is an extra, in this case, $2 million in portfolio value. So there you have it. That's exactly how I'd be thinking about my retirement if my wife and I had $1 million saved at age 55. And maybe your number is a little bit different than $1 million. Maybe it's more, or perhaps it's a little bit less. The main idea, though, is that if you follow these strategies, we can add more value to what you keep in retirement. So if you found this video helpful, be sure to like and subscribe for more updates just like this. Or if you need help navigating these strategies in your own retirement plan, please reach out and schedule a consultation via the link below. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.